Chapter 8 Year 874 PXF Autumn. Osman was stunned. He slowly reached out a hand and passed it through Wilfred's incorporeal form.
"What do you think you're doing?"
Wilfred chided.
"Do I look like flesh and bone to you?"
"Well, no, but you said," Osman began before Wilfred interrupted.
"I said I'm not a willico. That doesn't mean I'm gonna start juggling jellyfish anytime soon."
He added,
"And yes, I said that intentionally. I'm not gonna be tickling trout or slapping salmon either."
Wilfred began to chuckle at the last alliteration. As Osman started to guffaw at the testy fisherman, Wilfred added with mirth,
"Give me some slack in my lines. 2,500 years having only a few dozen phrases worth of vocabulary will take some time to break out of."
Osman caught his breath and asked with a genuine curiosity,
"But how? I've never been able to get past the stones before,"
Wilfred explained.
"The few times I tried, the stone sent me back to the coast where it all started."
Looking back at the stone and then at Osman, his voice trailing off.
"No one's ever wanted me before."
"So my father, he had Riken?"
Osman asked.
"I didn't see him cross. All I know is people may only enter alone, or with one other, never more,"
Wilfred explained.
"I've seen hundreds of pilgrims try and reach the Inception. Only a few dozen have made it here. Twice I've seen a group of 3 attempt to cross."
Wilfred looked down at his feet and continued with a voice barely above a whisper.
"The stones didn't grant them passage together."
"What happened?"
Osman asked gently.
"Selfishness, pride, doubt."
Wilfred became lost in the recollection for a moment.
"Friends, lovers, family. They tore each other apart."
Osman felt guilty that he had dampened the mood of Wilfred's newfound freedom with such a grisly memory, but it also made him wonder what trial might lie ahead for them at the Inception. Osman said the thought aloud as it crossed his mind.
"Whatever lies ahead, perhaps it will be easier together."
Wilfred nodded. With Osman holding Alarice's painting like a compass and marking their direction from Grimspire's peak looming overhead, the two walked deeper into the grove, toward the Argestian Inception and its guardian. Just over an hour later, Osman and Wilfred came to a clearing in the forest of birches. The glade was utterly empty. Neither rock nor vegetation broke the flat expanse of ground, its only covering a carpet of fallen golden birch leaves. Osman looked to the sky and the peak of Grimspire. Holding the tiny painting that had guided him all this way at arm's length so its image was side by side with the landscape before him, he saw they were now a perfect match. With a nod, he looked to Wilfred and stepped carefully out of the tree line onto the carpet of leaves. The leaves crunching under his footsteps seemed louder than thunder rolling across the mountains as Osman crossed the clearing. Trying to make each step more gentle than the last, he finally reached the center with Wilfred at his side.
"Hello?"
Osman hailed to whoever or whatever might be listening. He did not draw Talon's dagger, but it was close at hand on his belt. He knew even a weapon like the Vermilion Blade would be of little use against an ancient guardian of the elements, much less an iron dagger, but he also was not willing to have it entirely out of reach. Wilfred then raised his voice and spoke.
"We seek the guardian of wind and tide, the keeper of the frozen inception of primal air and water."
Osman looked to Wilfred and whispered out of the side of his mouth.
"How did you know that?"
"I've kept my ears open around many a campfire through the years,"
Wilfred whispered back. The first few moments of silence drew out into a minute, and then a minute more, and another after that. Osman shifted his weight from one foot to the other and back again. Slowly turning in a circle, he spoke again.
"I seek knowledge of my father, who came here to cleanse a human boy's soul nearly 20 years ago. I
The voice came from all around them, howling like the wind, but also no more than a whisper in their ears. A swirling wind surrounded Osmond and Wilfred. The carpet of leaves rose from the ground in a flurry, creating a golden curtain, blinding them even from each other standing side by side. The air grew chill and then colder still. The golden leaves bleached white with frost, and began to shatter into a maelstrom of snow and ice. The force of the blizzard was impossible to stand against, and Osmond fell to his knees and huddled over his core to try and retain warmth. The darkness and frozen fury of the storm was all-encompassing. Osmond's only comfort was the soft green glow of Wilfred's form standing over him. Osmond could barely discern over the howling gale that words were being spoken. Wilfred was saying something, but the wind drowned out their meaning from his ears. A deep instinctual need to survive filled Osmond's mind, and he curled deeper into himself, cowering from the forces at play around him, trying to conserve what little heat his body produced, as it shivered violently under his cloak. The voice then focused on him.
What do you truly seek?
Osmond, his body chilled beyond being able to shiver any longer, knew he did not have time to say anything but his truth.
My father, a family, to be whole again.
Then leave that shell behind and stand to see what it is you ask.
Osmond stood without thinking, but only his spirit was now on its feet. His body remained on the ground, frozen in a huddled ball. Incorporeal as Wilfred, his ghostly eyes looked around the clearing, seemingly free of the storm. Beyond the glade was not a forest of birch trees, but one made of ice-covered Uldani bodies frozen in every conceivable pose possible. Some were peaceful, some in a rictus of terror, but all were statues frozen in time. Osmond looked around for Wilfred. The voice, no longer all-encompassing, came from beside him.
He is not with you in this place, but also not far away.
Osmond turned his head to the voice and found himself face to face with a shimmering white serpent head as large as his torso. The serpent's frosted crystalline body was continually in motion behind the head, held aloft by a half-dozen wings as they slid past each other in a writhing dance of reflected light.
To be whole is to be healed. To be healed, one must first be cleansed. And you are the opposite of cleansed. Stolen power flows into you like a tide returning to the shore.
The serpent slithered through the air around Osmond's back to whisper in his other ear.
You want to know your father? It is his life your flesh now consumes.
The serpent's maw loomed over his corporeal flesh as it spasmed on the ground from the cold.
I don't understand what you mean. I hardly knew my father. I only recently discovered he might have even wanted to know me,
Osmond confessed. The serpent's voice softened.
Let me show you what he did for his son.
Osmond saw before him two figures carved of crystal-clear ice. One he immediately recognized as his father. The other, a young, strongly built human nearly his father's height with cropped hair in the style of blacksmiths. Riken. Within the young blacksmith was a shadow given form, an abomination of darkness and ruin, with a wavering spider-like shape that shifted and writhed as though not fully corporeal. Its circular mouth, full of needle-like teeth, dripped with ichor and undulated unnervingly as it feasted on Riken's young and vibrant soul. Its body was bloated, like a tick too long on a hound's ear. The wraith spider's hind legs were in constant motion. They meticulously wove an intricate blood-red silken chain from the golden energy it consumed from Riken's soul, digested, and then excreted for its purpose out of spinnerets on the nightmare creature's abdomen. Osmond felt bile rise in his incorporeal throat, despite his physical body being on the ground at his feet. The serpent guided Osmond's ghostly eyes to follow the winding filament of the vile chain as it flowed into the sky northward.
"See the truth,"
the serpent hissed into Osmond's ear. Above him, at the point where the silken chain passed through its dancing ribbon of light, the Solenfell opened the sky to Osmond's eyes. The Solenfell was no longer just an awe-inspiring display of color and motion. It was a mosaic of pictures and forms as though painted by his father's hand. He saw a young Talon nearly unrecognizable but for his wild mane of hair. Grief had twisted him into a pitiful wretch as it racked his slight frame and lean physique, so different from the towering, powerful man he knew. Osmond saw the spider's corrupt gossamer chain snaking toward his Crodran. Osmond watched as it struck like a scorpion's tail and pierced the large artery in Talon's neck. Bloated with energy pulled from Riken's soul, each link wormed into Talon's flesh and began to flow through his veins. The image in the Solenfell shifted. Osmond saw Talon older, now near the end of his teenage years, his form looking more like the man he recognized, but still not yet fully formed. He was training in the familiar Courvemain courtyard with a silver-haired warrior in black armor. Now dozens of the spider's ethereal chains flowed into Talon, undulating with their harvested energy. Where the filaments of crimson chain pierced his flesh, his veins seemed to devour them link by tiny link, swallowing their power, leaving Talon utterly unaware of their presence. Osmond saw other chains bound Talon as well. A shifting web of arcane links seemed to surround his Crodran, guiding his glaive as he trained. But Osmond could see what Talon could not, their addictive nature trying to bend him to their will. Finally, there was a black chain forged of hate and spite, large enough to anchor an Uldani battle galleon. It stretched out of Talon's abdomen through the cobblestones toward the bowels of the Courvemain estate, like a desiccated iron umbilical cord. As Osmond tracked the chain of darkness toward its source, he lifted his eyes to the study window he and Talon had magically passed through at the gala. There, like a malevolent conductor, Tommen Courvemain loomed over the courtyard, weaving fiendish and arcane runes, shaping and augmenting his son like he was no more than a necromancer's construct built of stolen corpses. Not an ounce of care or remorse marred Tommen's face, just a malevolent zeal as he watched the ripening fruit of his labor. The serpent's voice slithered into Osmond's ears.
"The servant of darkness poured the energy his abomination stole into your Crodran's flesh, flooding it with the things he coveted and valued most: size, power, and strength."
The serpent continued with an undertone of malice for Tommen's actions.
"His son, no more than a weapon of muscle and bone in his eyes, became a transgression against nature itself and all its designs for Talon. An aberration formed in response to Talon's broken heart and fueled by the life force being pumped through his veins by Tommen's parasitic minion, the Hellhound infected his lost love with."
The Solenfell advanced through time. Osmond now saw himself painted in the sky, fighting Talon at the base of the stairs of Arnador Keep, the day of the failed coup. The spider's silken chains no longer flowed into Talon, but at the hundreds of sites where they once entered his body, his skin had grown translucent and revealed thousands upon thousands of their tiny links pulsing through his veins and flesh. The other chains were still evident as well. The arcane links that had been his ally in training now swarmed around him like vicious snakes flowing out of the vermilion blade, trying to move his limbs against his will, screaming for him to draw the glaive and strike Osmond down. The black chain at his abdomen pulled and yanked at Talon's mind and soul, adding its dark energy to all the other forces at work on him in this final effort to bend him to his father's will. With the Solenfel's added perspective, Osmond realized how dire Talon's struggle had been. Osmond watched Talon plunge the dagger into the image of himself painted across the night. He recognized the depth of the miracle his Kroldran's love had achieved. Talon had been more chains than man, the totality of the forces controlling him all but unimaginable. Yet, he still saved Osmond even after Osmond had refused to stand by his side, betraying his Kroldran for the lies of Serena. He turned his head away and averted his eyes in shame. The serpent grabbed his head roughly in its coils and snapped it back to the sky. It hissed angrily in his mind.
You do not get the luxury of denying what you have done and was done for you.
An image of Talon floating lifelessly in space filled the entire sky. His face was peaceful and almost angelic, with his hair spread around him like a halo. But, where his hands should be, his forearms ended in blackened stumps, and his body hung obscenely from the black chain welded to his abdomen. The sound of a fading heartbeat, echoing off the impossible heights of Grimspire in the distance, filled the night around Osmond's ghostly form. He became dimly aware of his own body's dwindling heartbeat, but he no longer cared. All that mattered was his Kroldran. Ghostly tears spilled out of Osmond's eyes as Talon's heartbeats grew further apart and finally stopped, one final beat echoing across the plains of Kaithlanor. Osmond wailed into the night, unable to move, still immobilized by the serpent's coils around his head and body, forced to stare at his brother's corpse hanging in the sky. Sobs racked his spirit so violently that his uninhabited corporeal body lying on the ground shook from their intensity. Crack! The sound rang out at a volume that would turn a thunderclap to little more than a kitten's purr by comparison. The foundation of Grimspire seemed to shudder at its power as Osmond watched the image of Talon above him flash bright gold, the black chain holding him shattering as though it was no more than an icicle under a blacksmith's maul. It evaporated into the ether. From Talon's body, as though being shed like pollen from a summer flower, Osmond watched as thousands of the now broken tiny crimson links woven by the spider spilled across the sky. The painting flashed backward in time, and the scene of teenage Talon training in the courtyard hung in the sky as the serpent forced Osmond's eyes back to the figures carved in ice of his father and Riken.
The whole story is not yet told, son of Tavi. Your father was not one to underestimate a rival twice.
Under the sky filled with the image of Talon training with the warrior in black, Osmond watched on the ground before him as the icy form of his father reached into Riken's chest and pulled the bloated spider out of the boy. The vile creature struggled and screeched in his father's grasp, the woven chain of energy unraveling in the sky as it did so. Osmond thought his father would surely crush the parasite in his hands or immolate it in a blaze of fiery magic, but he did not. Tavi looked up at the silken chain of energy as it frayed, lowered his gaze to look directly into Osmond's eyes as though he was there, and said,
"For you, and to keep him safe."
His father then pushed his hand holding the bloated spider into his chest. Like a tick, it burrowed deep into his body and latched onto its new host's life force and soul. Clenched agony contorted his father's face, but the parasite, feasting in content, began to weave its chain once more. Tavi's life force, flowing freely through the abomination, was incorporated into the crimson chain and rose into the sky uninterrupted to its destination, the Courvermain estate, for Tommen to empower the thrall he was creating out of his son. Both admiration and kindness filled the serpent's voice as it spoke again.
Your father deceived the Dark Weaver right in front of his own eyes. By substituting his life force for Riken's soul, he not only freed Riken to be reincarnated, but Tavi's considerable will and connection to nature and the elements were embedded into Talon's flesh by Toman himself.
The serpent's voice held amusement and almost a sense of pride as he finished and directed Osmond's eyes back to the crystal figures before them. In the scene before Osmond, Riken's form coalesced into a shining white crystal shard that his father placed in a small box. With a sigh, Tavi staggered westward as the spider in his chest continued its grim work. A heartbeat broke the trembling and stunned silence consuming Osmond. The Solenfell image in the sky was once again the ruined body of Talon surrounded by a growing cloud of broken crimson links leaking out of him. Another heartbeat echoed through the night, and the image of Talon moved of its own volition. Some links swarmed to Talon's hands, regenerating the flesh at an astonishing rate, but others began aligning themselves in an array, like metal filings around a magnet. The tiny links started to flow along whatever invisible currents of force guided them. One of the larger groupings began to wind out of the Solenfell and down from the sky. Osmond followed their path like he used to follow lines of ants as a child, and discovered their destination. They flowed into the body at his feet. They were merging with him.
What was sacrificed by the Father returns to the Son.
The serpent's head slid into Osmond's line of sight.
But are you willing to accept all the gift carries with it? What your father freely gave has been shaped by demons and gods alike. Even one such as I cannot predict all it brings with its return.
Osmond's mind was reeling. He thought of how the Uellen chieftain in the Saldrig pelt had said he stank of the new gods. Wilfred had said nearly the same. Before he could fully process the implications and how long he had been on the receiving end of energy stolen by the parasite, first from Riken and then his father, the serpent offered a choice.
There is also the easier path. Deny the gift and become part of my forest. Let your father's energy find other paths and disperse into the world as fate sees fit.
The serpent looked out at the forest of frozen bodies.
What you see are not corpses of the dead. When joined, the domains of air and water are of cleansing and protection, not healing. But a person within my care can draw upon the healing forces of the world and repair itself if given time, and if the body and spirit are willing.
The serpent circled Osmond, all the while looking at the frozen figures almost lovingly.
Many among my grove bear the same scars and wounds as yourself. Some take years to heal, others decades.
The serpent returned its gaze to Osmond.
Those unwilling to face their trauma can spend centuries mending their soul. Time is meaningless for those among my grove. It passes only as quickly or slowly as one desires. When their work on themselves is complete, the ice melts and they leave.
The serpent's offer to be whole again sorely tempted Osmond. To regain his emotions so he could grow to know who his father genuinely was once he had healed, so he would be able to experience everything he lost once more. Osmond was but a youth by Uldani standards, with centuries still to live in front of him. Some peace from all the turmoil in his mind and heart would be a welcome respite after the chaos of the last few years. He could spend his exile here in the grove and be free to roam whole again wherever he wanted when he emerged from the serpent's garden. But then he thought of the look on his father's face, his words and his painting on the cave wall. Tavi might not have known all of what would return when his sacrificed life force flowed back to Osman, but he had meant for his son to have it. Osman looked to the serpent.
I will receive my father's gift, even if it means you cannot cleanse me, and my soul will not heal.
I did not say I would not cleanse you. I said it would not be the gentle respite of my grove.
The serpent continued in a terrifyingly curious, almost scholarly tone.
Perhaps this power, touched by gods and demons, and tempered by your father's sacrifice, will even allow you to survive it.
The serpent offered consolingly.
At least you will not be alone.
Suddenly, Wilfred appeared at his side.
Wilfred, I'm not sure what will come of this, but I think it's what I must do.
Osman hurriedly sputtered out, not sure how much time he had.
Whatever it is, I won't leave you,
Wilfred stated without hesitation. The serpent opened its maw, and an icy cone of ethereal frost and ice spewed forth, enveloping Osman's spirit and driving it back into his body, still huddled against the cold at his feet. Osman could feel all the damage the cold had wrought upon his flesh during his spiritual encounter with the serpent. Even through that searing pain, though, he felt the serpent's breath scour clean the wounds that had banished his emotions for his father, Horizon's End, and all the things now infected by the spreading void he created years ago. The debrided wounds in Osman's soul screamed out with the return of each and every emotion banished from his childhood and denied them for the last 8 years. An onslaught of Keel slammed into Osman's flesh. Every muscle tensed in a rictus of pain, his body stretched, spread eagle in the snow carpeting the clearing. Osman felt his skin melt in the flames of rage, flowing off his limbs only to reform under the petal-soft touch of kindness. His joints dislocated and his bones broke under the torsion of his muscles as they reacted to guilt and malice. His jaw clenched so violently from reliving decades of loneliness it cracked his teeth in their sockets. Even smiles from pent-up joy and gratefulness took their toll on his body as the magnified strength of the emotion ripped his facial muscles off his cheekbones. For every injury his unleashed Keel inflicted on his physical body, the crimson energy returning to his flesh healed it. Each respite the Keel of love, kindness, or comfort gave only heightened the following sensations and injuries caused by hate, abandonment, and loss. How many times Osman's body contorted, twisted, and ripped itself apart, only to be remade by the crimson energy, was impossible to tell. Osman fell into an abyss of unending pain. His mind, lost in anguish as his emotions and waves of Keel tore his body to shreds once again, grasped for anything to hold on to. The last thing he heard as he took his final breath was Wilfred's voice yelling,
Stop! I agree to your terms. Now stand by yours, Snake. He is my charge now, and ye shall harm him no further.
Darkness.